Cold air hangs over the Appalachian ridge like a warning, the kind only old folks claim they can feel in their bones. And somewhere between the sagging pines and the whispering hills lies one of Appalachia's darkest secrets, a family so feared. Even the bravest locals lower their voices when their name slips out. Their farmhouse still stands, tilted just enough to look unnatural, as if the land itself tried to shrug it off. At night, the wind drags across the loose boards, making a sound that resembles breathing. Anyone passing by swears the place listens, watches, remembers. The county sheriff used to say there was evil out here, you don't look dead in the eye. Folks figured he meant the animals. But the truth pointed to a family, born and raised in the hills, who turned those same hills into their own cruel territory. You can almost picture it now, a faint lantern glow behind a broken window, a shadow crossing the room though no one's lived there for decades. People still whisper about them. And they whisper because the story never really ended. If this kind of hidden Appalachian story pulls you in, settle close. Like the video, subscribe to History Uncensored, and share it with someone who loves these forgotten corners of America. And tell me, where are you watching from? Trust me, what comes next stays with you long after the screen goes dark. Let's continue, because this story only grows stranger. The ridge always looked harmless from a distance, a long, rolling spine of trees fading into the mist, but anyone who grew up near it understood there was something off about that stretch of land. Even the animals avoided it. Deer would skirt the base, circling wide as if the soil held memories they wanted no part of. And on certain nights, when the cold wind spilled down the slope, it carried a tone that felt almost deliberate, like a sigh from something living just beneath the roots. Old-timers used to warn children not to wander past the third fence post. That's where the ridge starts watching, they'd whisper, pretending it was a joke. But they locked their doors early, and they kept their lanterns burning, low habits passed down so quietly no one questioned them. Every family in that valley felt the same pressure in their chest when night arrived, the same sense of being observed. Imagine standing there alone, the distant hills fading, the trees barely moving, yet the air around you shifting like someone walking just out of sight. That's where the story begins, with a patch of land that never let anyone feel truly alone. By day, the ridge wore a different mask. Sunlight splintered through the pine needles, the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves thick in the air. Birds called in bursts, then fell silent as if remembering something they weren't supposed to know. Hikers and hunters who dared venture too far reported a strange heaviness pressing down on their shoulders, a sensation like the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting. Locals said it wasn't just the land, it was the history carved into it. Generations of families who moved away, leaving only faint traces, rusted tools, broken fences, half-burned cabins swallowed by moss. The ridge seemed to eat their stories, folding them into the wind. And in that quiet, you could almost hear whispers, fragments of names, warnings, arguments drifting through the fog, impossible to place, impossible to ignore. Some nights, the ridge would hum. Not a bird, not a brook, but something lower, vibrating through the soles of your feet, rising into your chest. It was here, in this uneasy stillness, that the family first made their mark, a shadow growing quietly, waiting for the rest of the valley to notice. No one ever said their name aloud, not in church pews, not at the general store, not even under the hush of kitchen lamplight. It wasn't superstition, it was fear. The family had been in the holler for generations, their roots tangled deep into the ridge, deeper than any oak or pine. Stories said they were born there, and raised fear there, shaping the land as much as it shaped them. Neighbors who tried to speak of them always faltered. They weren't right. Old men muttered, gazing at the horizon. Folk just knew better than to cross them. Children were warned to keep their distance. Pets vanished. Livestock died off. And the family itself. Imagine standing at the edge of their yard, the wind stirring the weeds, hearing a faint whistle, and feeling it wasn't coming from anyone human. The family had secrets, yes, but more than that, they had power. And in the holler, power that couldn't be named out loud was power that ruled. The family's presence was subtle at first, almost invisible to outsiders. A passing glance would see a ramshackle porch, laundry lines sagging with faded cloth, smoke curling from a crooked chimney. But locals felt it differently, a tension in the air, a shift in the way the trees leaned. Even the dogs stopped barking when they passed. One old neighbor recalled the youngest child pointing toward the ridge and whispering, "They see everything." Before the family matriarch snapped her fingers and the child looked away, eyes wide with both fear and awe. It wasn't just intimidation. It was a rhythm of control embedded in every gesture, every creaking step across the floorboards. Neighbors didn't leave gifts at their door, didn't ask favors. If the family wanted something, a horse, a tool, a secret, they didn't knock politely. They waited. And the hills themselves seemed to conspire, hiding tracks, erasing paths, twisting trails back on themselves until anyone who tried to intrude returned with nothing but exhaustion and unease. Imagine the whispers growing with every passing year, a collective hush so thick it felt alive. That hush didn't just hide secrets. It protected them. It made sure that even the boldest souls knew some names are safer left unspoken, some stories better left untold. The ridge held them, and they held the ridge. Fear was their inheritance, and the valley learned quickly. Some families exist not to be understood, but to be survived. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of night when the fog sits low across the holler and every sound feels twice as loud. Folks were already inside, shutters drawn, kerosene lamps dimmed to soft amber. Midnight was close when the first scream tore through the ridge. It wasn't loud in the way a coyote cries or a panther calls. It was sharper, human in shape, but twisted, like someone had swallowed their own voice and forced it back out through clenched teeth. The scream rolled across the valley in waves. Dogs that had been dozing shot up barking, then fell silent all at once, their tails tucked so tight they trembled. One farmer swore the air turned cold enough to make his windows fog from the inside. Another said he heard footsteps pacing outside his barn, though nothing appeared when he checked with a lantern. What struck people most wasn't just the sound, it was the direction. Everyone agreed it came from their ridge, from the family's land. And deeper still, as if the earth itself was giving voice to something it had held buried far too long. Parents held their children close. Old men prayed. And in the shadows, the ridge seemed to inhale. By the time the second scream came, it didn't sound like one person anymore. It rose from the ridge in uneven pulses, high, low, then abruptly cut off, replaced by a ragged scraping noise that echoed across the hollow like something being dragged through wet leaves. Windows shook, chickens fluttered in their coops. Somewhere in the distance, a baby wailed, sensing what the adults tried to ignore. Some neighbors stepped onto their porches, lanterns trembling in their hands. They scanned the tree line, squinting into the dark, hoping or maybe begging for the sound to be explained by anything ordinary. But the ridge was still, no figures running, no animals fleeing, just that awful scraping, then silence thick enough to swallow breath. And then, as if the night had been waiting for the exact moment when courage failed, a third sound rose. Not a scream, not a cry, more like a low chant, carried by the wind, drifting down the mountain in a pattern no one recognized. Some said it was words. Others insisted it was something older than language. Whatever it was, it had come from the family's property, and it lingered long after the echoes faded. People knew, deep down, something had changed on the ridge that night. Something that wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. Sheriff Dalton McCready wasn't the kind of man who scared easy. He'd grown up in these hills, hunting before he could read, tracking deer the way other boys played marbles. But even he hesitated when he stepped onto the ridge the morning after the screams. The grass was wet with dew, the air strangely still, and the trail that led toward the family's land looked different, as if it had shifted in the night. He followed it anyway, boots sinking softly into the soil. A faint print appeared now, and then a heel mark, a toe dragging, then vanished completely, swallowed by untouched ground. Dalton slowed. Trails didn't change themselves. Not like this. The deeper he went, the more wrong the land felt. Birdsong faded. The wind stopped moving. Even the trees looked older somehow, bent in directions that didn't match the weather. He knelt once, brushing his hand over a patch of dirt. It had been disturbed recently, yet no tracks led in or out. Just a circle of churned earth, like someone or something had stood there turning in slow, deliberate circles. Dalton straightened, pulse thudding in his ears. He'd come looking for answers. What he found instead was the unmistakable feeling of being watched. By the time Sheriff Dalton reached the family's fence line, The morning light had turned thin and metallic. The house sat crooked at the top of the rise, shutters hanging like broken ribs, smoke trailing lazily from the chimney, though no one should have been awake at that hour. Dalton felt that old instinct, the one every mountain kid grows up with, whispering that he had stepped someplace he wasn't welcome. He called out once. No reply. Not even the soft rustle of someone shifting behind a curtain. Only the creak of the porch boards moving on their own, as if adjusting to a weight he couldn't see. Dalton approached the steps, boots scraping softly, and reached for the railing. It was warm, too warm for the early morning air. Then he saw it carved into the wood, faint but deliberate, a symbol he'd seen only once before, years back, during an unsolved case everyone pretended to forget. A spiral cut into overlapping lines, the kind that made your stomach tighten for reasons you couldn't explain. Dalton stepped back. Something about the ridge had changed. The family wasn't hiding. They were waiting. He left without knocking, without asking questions, without filling out a single report. And from that day on, he spoke less, drank more, and avoided the ridge like a man who'd glimpsed a truth he wished he hadn't. The fire should have erased everything. That's what the townspeople believed when flames took hold of the family's house one bitter autumn night. The sky glowed red above the ridge, and smoke rolled down the hillside like a warning too late to heed. Folks watched from their porches, eyes narrowed, arms folded tight across their chests. Not one soul climbed the ridge to help, not because they didn't want to, but because they knew better. By dawn, the house was nothing but a blackened skeleton, beams curled in on themselves, roof collapsed into smoldering ash. The sheriff, older now, quieter, made the hike up alone. He found no footprints, no bodies, no sign that anyone had tried to escape or fight the fire. The family was simply gone. He reported it as unconfirmed casualties. The town preferred that phrasing. It left room for distance, for doubt, for the uneasy possibility that the family wasn't dead at all. And then the strange thing started. Lantern lights spotted through burnt windows where no building remained. A door slamming on moonless nights. The outline of someone standing in the ruins, shoulders slanted, head tilted just enough to freeze a person's breath. People whispered one question quietly, fearfully. If the family was gone, who was still inside the house? Winter settled fast that year, dropping a thin crust of frost over the ruins. Most folks avoided the ridge, but every now and then someone passing on the lower road would glance up and swear the house looked whole again. Not fully rebuilt, not standing proud, but outlined in the dark as if its shape had never burned at all. A trick of the eyes, they told themselves. The mind playing with shadows. But shadows don't breathe, and more than one person claimed they saw the faint fog of exhaled air drifting from where the front porch used to be. One hunter, stubborn, half-drunk, claimed he heard footsteps crunching behind him on the ridge. Slow, heavy, in no hurry. When he turned, no one was there. Only the burnt frame of a doorway, leaning just enough to suggest someone had passed through it moments before. He left his rifle on the trail that night, stumbling home pale as moonlight. Even the sheriff couldn't deny it anymore. The ridge hadn't quieted. It hadn't healed. If anything, it pulsed with a strange, restless energy, as if something underneath the land was shifting, adjusting, preparing. Folks began to say the family never left. Their bodies were gone, sure, but the ridge had claimed them, and the house had still waited for footsteps to return. Some swore they already had. Spring brought new growth to the valley, honeysuckle climbing fences, saplings pushing through soft soil, but the ridge remained unchanged. Its trees stayed darker, its ground quieter, as if the land refused to let anything fresh take root. People avoided looking in its direction. Even the birds, usually quick to reclaim abandoned territory, stayed away, circling wide around the burned-out rise. The strangest tale came from a woman who'd lived in the valley her whole life. She said she woke one night to the creaking sound of her front steps settling under weight. When she looked out the window, she saw muddy footprints leading away, footprints matching the old family's pattern. Long stride, heavy heel, slight drag. Footprints leading toward the ridge. And all she whispered was, "They're walking again." In these hills, echoes don't fade. They bide their time. The valley never returned to the way it was. Even new families who moved in, people with no knowledge of the ridge or the whispers tied to it, felt the change. They'd pause mid-step on quiet evenings, glancing toward the tree as if someone had just spoken their name from far off. Others reported losing their sense of direction near the base of the ridge, walking in circles without realizing it, as though the land nudged them away from a place they weren't supposed to enter. Sheriff Dalton, gray-haired now and worn thin by years of keeping secrets he never asked for, finally left the valley without warning. He locked his office door, placed his badge on the desk, and drove until the hills behind him faded into the rearview mirror. The townspeople didn't blame him. Some said he'd held too much for too long. Others whispered he'd seen the family again. But the ridge remained. And at night, when fog drapes itself low across the valley floor, locals swear they can hear footsteps pacing where the house once stood. Slow, measured, familiar. No one speaks the family's name. No one climbs the ridge. And no one pretends the land is empty anymore. Because in Appalachia, stories don't die, they wait. And this one still listens. Somewhere beyond the last porch light, where the hills fold into each other and the night gets thicker than smoke, the ridge still waits. The house may be gone. The family may be nothing but a memory stitched into old fears, but the land remembers. It always does. And if you ever find yourself driving through a quiet Appalachian valley long after midnight, slow down. Listen. The wind up there carries more than cold air. It carries stories, footsteps, and a warning older than the road beneath you. Because some places never let go of what they claim. And some families never leave, even when everyone else believes they should. Stay curious. Stay cautious. And whatever you do, don't follow the sound if it calls your name.